are as well is that there's always outreach that needs to be done, when it comes to voting. Can you talk a little bit about the types of outreach and empowerment?
Very much. We're going to call us back from recess. And the first item that we have is alcohol beverage services, and that is under the Public Safety Committee. And I'm going to turn to Mr. Howard to lead us through in the beginning, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good afternoon, council members. So the ABS budget, as we'll talk about, is a little bit different in how we handle it than the other departments in county government. So I think it'll be easiest for me to walk through the packet and the council staff recommendations under the continuity of services approach, and then turn it back for questions, comments, and discussion with ABS staff. Mr. Dorfman and many members of his team are available to answer any questions you may have. The executive's recommendation for the ABS budget is $64.7 million, which is an increase of about 1% over FY20. The proposed FY21 transfer to the general fund is $30.5 million. This is an increase of $2.1 million or 7.5% from the FY20 budget. $26.8 million of the transfer is unrestricted. That is, it just goes to the general fund and can be used for any programs or services. The other part deals with chargebacks and things like that ABS has to pay to other internal service funds. In addition, ABS will make $9.2 million in debt service payments in FY21, and this, of course, is related to the debt service for the different transportation projects and the warehouse that were bonded with liquor revenue. In terms of the council authority on the ABS budget, we talk about this each year during the Public Safety Committee. I don't think we talk about it as much at the full council, but I'll mention it here since we're doing everything at full council. The council can make recommendations on the ABS budget, but unlike other departments, the final decisions are subject to the authority of the county executive. However, council staff does note that any council decisions on compensation and benefit adjustments would apply to ABS no different than any other county department. So the council staff recommendation under the continuity of services framework is a total budget of $63.7 million. And it's a decrease of about a little over $1 million from the executive's FY21 recommendation. And I know, and I'll go through the changes in just a second, but I do note that the council can request that the executive use this potential reduction from the continuity of services budget to increase the general fund transfer in FY21. So the items that staff did not include in the continuity of services budget, the first one is compensation adjustments, which is about $740,000. And then there's two other enhancements that are listed on the second page of the staff report. The first is the increase of $150,000 to add a new truck to the delivery fleet. ABS's budget included $300,000 to replace two new trucks, and one of the trucks is now needed to replace an existing truck that is now permanently out of service because of a traffic accident. So as a result, staff considered one of the proposed trucks as needed for continuity of services and the second truck as an enhancement. And in discussions with ABS, given the current fiscal situation, ABS and the executive are willing to delay the purchase of one truck until FY22. So that would be a reduction of $150,000. And there's a second $150,000 reduction related to improvements in the warehouse conveyor system. This is some improvements ABS was planning to make during FY21, but again, given the current fiscal situation, ABS and the executive are willing to postpone this system improvement until FY22. So together with those two $150,000 reductions and these potential savings of $740,000 from the compensation adjustments, that gets you to the $1 million that the council could ask is put towards the general fund transfer. There are a couple things that I left in from the staff recommendation. The first one is an increase of $1.4 million and 12.8 FTEs to open 2 new spirits-only retail stores in FY21. And while this is an enhancement, ABS and the executive have indicated that they still plan to move ahead with the 2 new stores in FY21, even under the continuity of services framework. So that's why I left it in. as opposed to the other enhancements where they agreed to delay those for a year. There is an increase of $550,000 for updates to their retail point of sale system, and this is due to their current system will reach the end of its technological life in July, where it will no longer be updated or supported by the vendor. And given the operational and security issues this could pose and the need to have a functioning point of sale system, staff considers this increase consistent with continuity of services. And then the other enhancement is the increase of $150,000 to for the new truck to the delivery fleet. And again, I mentioned I split that increase in half. And then there's some other adjustments related to different components, including shifting the $1.335 million that was in the operating budget last year for retail store refreshments. That funding has been moved over to the new CIP project that the council discussed the other day. And then the other adjustments relate to annualization of expenses and things like that we've been including within continuity of services for other departments. So that's kind of the overview of the ABS budget and how staff handled it. Again, this is a little bit different from other departments in that the executive has the final authority to make decisions and the council just makes recommendations. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. It is very different for this budget rather than all the other budgets because this is just recommendations on our part. I did want to ask Mr. Dorfman about the conveyor system. I don't understand how the conveyor system would help improve the delivery error rate improvements. How does that fit together?
What it does is, oops.
Yeah, you're one.
I'm on. What it does is it improves the accuracy of the picking. So by reading the scanning, by having an electrical eye that's there to improve the scanning capabilities, much like FedEx and UPS use, it'll improve the accuracy and therefore will help enhance the overall delivery percentage accuracy to our licensees and our own stores.
I see. So it's more than just a conveyor belt, obviously. It's software and everything else associated with it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. However, the increase in accuracy would go up by tenths of a point, which overall is a lot given the numbers of millions of cases that we ship. However, given the circumstances, the financial circumstances that the county finds itself in, we can certainly delay that into fiscal year 22.
Okay. And the concern about the truck, obviously one was just involved in an accident. Are we self-insured for that? How does that work?
We are self-insured for that. Yeah, that is my question.
So is that coming out of a self-insurance fund, the $150,000?
No. Well, we hope to get reimbursed for the whatever insurance parts of that truck are, but that would come out of the county and out of the county insurance fund, as I understand it. If there's somebody on this call, David or someone better understands how the insurance program works, but there would be partial reimbursement for that. The entire truck wasn't totaled. The structural chassis was maintained. It's the body of the truck was basically broken. And that's what needs to either be replaced or the truck itself, depending on what that cost would be. It might just be cheaper to replace the entire truck.
Mr. Dice, can you shed some light on this, please?
I can. That was one of our newer buses. That was a 2017. I actually looked at the, not a bus, but a truck. I actually looked at the vehicle when it was taken to our Shady Grove site. And as a hallmark to its construction, the chassis is in sound condition. It was just the upper body and cab that was destroyed. And we're talking to the manufacturer to see if we can just have that replaced. And that does come out of the county's self-insurance fund and will be submitted as a claim through a risk management.
Okay, and the idea that about the two new spirits-only retail stores, I believe that that's something that there again, it goes beyond just the budget. But I really do believe that that's something that the county should be heading towards, is rather than be competition to our beer and wine stores, that we should enhance our beer and wine stores, the retail operations for independent owners, and have the spirits only retail stores be near those stores, but that we would not be in competition to those places that have to buy their wholesale goods from us, and then we compete with them right afterwards.
Mr. President,
Yes.
that is exactly what the intent is. It not only does it bring the distilled spirits closer to the population that it's intended to serve, but it maintains all of the beer and wine purchases in that particular location, Poolsville being an example. It should keep all the beer and wine sales in Poolsville to the two local mom and pop beer and wine stores, as opposed to a lot of that population coming down and frequenting one of the county stores. So you're absolutely right. And that's a main thrust of our strategy, to improve the convenience of those stores while at the same time supporting our licensees.
And candidly, the licensees, when that happens, and as it continues to a greater degree, the licensees should want the alcohol beverage stores from the county near them, rather than be concerned that we are near them in the county. So I think that's the right way to go.
And there's a conceptual mismatch that people don't quite understand in terms of our relationship with our licensees. To any extent that we lose a licensee, that either they don't continue in business or they're not well supported, we lose income. So it is in ABS's best interest to do anything and everything it can to improve the success of every licensee that we serve.
And as it's been pointed out before, until just recently, many of our stores were not "quote unquote" profitable. So the licensees were the part where the county was receiving, but "quote unquote" the profit from. So, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. I'm not going to use this opportunity to have a philosophical discussion of
We agree with you.
control of alcohol. I did want to just appreciate, Mr. Dorfman, your responsiveness during this crisis and your help in trying to navigate through some of these vexing challenges, particularly for many of your licensees and our local employers who have really been struggling to get through this. You've been really responsive. Your team has been very responsive. I'm personally appreciative, notwithstanding any philosophical disagreements. I appreciate the fact that we can work well together. I did have a few questions about the budget in particular. I was hoping to get a little more clarification either from you or Mr. Howard on the shift, from the operating budget to the capital budget on the refresh program. It wasn't entirely clear to me what that meant. I know we had a discussion about this the other day, but if you could just explain that, that would be helpful for me.
Sure. Council Friedson, let me try to explain that. The $1.34 million that was moved from the operating budget to the CIP budget, that money was fiscal year 20 refresh money, which has been primarily already spent to open up and re-improve our Cabin John store as well as our Darnestown store. So that money was fiscal year 20, and that money was used for that purpose. The $1.7 million that we talked about last week at the CIP session, that's fiscal year 21. So there lies the difference. The 1.34 from fiscal year 20 was moved into the CIP session and the CIP portion of the budget for fiscal year 20, whereas the 1.7 million is a fiscal year 21 expenditure.
Yeah, so this is the part I don't understand. If you could just provide clarity. Why are we moving money from FY20 that's already been spent into the FY21 and beyond CIP?
Go ahead, Craig.
Mr. Friesen, it's not, we're not moving FY20 money. It's just from a budgetary perspective. The amount that was funded in FY20 was 1.4 million. So when we're talking about, how the budget looks from 20 to 21, there's a decrease of that amount because it's no longer going to be in the operating budget. In a normal year, that would have shown, if it was going to stay in the operating budget, that would have shown as an increase of $40,000.
It's an accounting issue.
It's an accounting issue.
Okay,
yes.
okay. Thank you for clarifying. Two more
Fiscal
questions.
year 20 reclassification is all really is.
I appreciate that. I wasn't entirely clear, but I think now I understand what you're saying. The $552,000 that was mentioned for the new retail point of sale system, I understand retail point of sale systems have to be changed. Is there a reason why, this seems like it caught up to the department, like almost caught off guard? Is there is there a reason for that, or is this a planned regular maintenance and replacement?
This is, Councilman Friedson, this has been this way in this system in place for 10, 15, 20 years. This is an end-of-life situation. And just so you know as well, the $550,000 that's in the fiscal year 21 budget is exactly one half of what's required to totally upgrade the 25 stores RMS system. What we agreed to with the county executive was, given that the rollout was going to take us more than a year anyway, let's not expend all the money in 1 year and let's split it into 2 years, which is what we're proposing for fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. But to your other point, there's security issues involved in not being able to be maintained with the existing system because of the useful life. There's no more vendor support. The other thing that is missing is ability to do add-ons. For example, one thing that we want to do are line busting techniques, which are handhelds, which a lot of the retail stores, if you go into Apple today, almost everything is done with handheld devices in the hands of employees. We don't have that capability. We don't have the capability to do some of the payment options like Apple Pay and some other things that customers today want to use. When we upgrade, we're going to make sure that what we upgrade to is consistently upgradable, and it doesn't preclude us from future technological advances. So that's why this is no surprise, but it starts.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it makes sense to me on the one hand. On the other hand, it's a little surprising to me that it seems like the system is no longer going to be supported, and we haven't planned to replace that before that point happens. It feels like, the end of the fiscal year is in less than 2 months. The system is no longer going to be supported from a technology standpoint. It's going to take more than a year, probably 2 years, as you said, maybe even longer, to change over. And that decision of changing the system so that it's supported and can meet the needs of the customers seems like it should have happened multiple years ago.
Oh, we've been talking about this, Councilman, for well over a year in terms of what RMS systems we ought to be looking at to replace the one that we have. But in terms of budgeting for the cost, we wouldn't have expected to expend any money in terms of upgrading that or replacing that system until fiscal year 21. But we've been in discussions with numerous vendors about numerous systems, as well as our own internal IT people, about what we ought to be looking for in those upgrades. So no, this is not something that just came upon us, but the expenditure is a fiscal year 21 expenditure.
Okay, okay. I'm not going to get too far into this, but I'll raise the questions offline. The big question moving forward to me is that the ABS retail stores and the warehouse, that's supplying the retail stores, are doing better than almost any other business that exists, maybe aside from grocery stores during this crisis. And you've stepped up in certain ways, which I appreciate, to change the way that you've allowed licensees to operate to-go cocktails and other options. You have some limitations based on Article 2B of the state code, which I appreciate and can understand based on my old job. But what is the philosophical thought process of how to address the fact that you're going to be making record revenue off of county residents, and as so many other businesses are being harmed? Is there a plan moving forward to repurpose some of that funding in order to support and help the licensees and the other businesses in the community that are struggling to stay afloat and stay in business at a time when the economy is in many ways is in free fall?
I think it's a great question. And although we have no authority over telling you or the council as to where you ought to be spending money during these very difficult times on behalf of whether they're restaurants or other small businesses, I think to the fact that we're starting to see this slow down, by the way. This is not something that's going to continue to increase as each month goes by. April was a slower month for us, bottom line, than was March. But however, to the extent that we're adding more money to the transfer to the county, I think helps you offset whether it's the $20 million that you're expending, the council is spending on small businesses, or whether it's, I think what we're doing is adding money for your ability to be able to support the small business in Montgomery County in a bigger and better way than would have otherwise been the case. And I think that's what our contribution is to the county.
Thanks. All my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. Well, I guess we took up the operating budget, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, but I did want to ask council staff again, how much funding is going, here today, sorry, we took up the capital budget. Here today, we're dealing with the operating budget. The amount of transfer from DLC to the general fund is less than what it would be, but for the plan to refresh a certain number of stores. How much is that amount in FY21, Craig?
But I think you're asking is in FY21 as part of the new capital project, ABS, I was about to call you DLC. ABS will spend $1.7 million on retail store refresh.
And that money, if not spent in that purpose, would be transferred to the general fund as
Potentially, it could be. I mean, it would be up to the executive and ABS and how they wanted to use those funds.
I mean, I just think in this moment, this is a time to try to maximize the transfer now rather than, the theory is the expenditure will increase the transfer later. But I don't know that we really know. I think the same goes for the new retail stores. I actually agree with Councilmember Katz, Council President Katz, that if we're going to have retail stores, it'd be better if they were liquor only. I wouldn't mind instituting that now for all the retail stores. I think we could. Well, I think the executive could, or ABS could. But setting that aside, I think that we ought to postpone adding new stores because they could not. It's possible that they won't break even. Many of them do not. I don't think we know. I think there's a hope that it'll break even, but it may not. And then, we might look back on this and see that in a time of budget crisis, we've spent millions of dollars, improving the stores and adding new stores and losing money in the short term. And that just doesn't seem like the safer move to me would be to just postpone a couple of years and get back to that when things are on more solid ground.
Council Reamer, may I respond to your point?
Sure.
I think the data really, I hate to kind of use that expression, but I think the data here, kind of speaks to itself. I mean, last year through March, year to date, we lost $3.7 million in our retail business. That was down from the $5 million, but we were at 3.7.
Okay.
This year, year to date,
Sorry,
we've lost $350,000.
Bob, can you just repeat that? So last year, from the beginning of the calendar year to this point in time?
Oh, fiscal year.
Fiscal year. So from July 1 to
July 1
terrible.
through March of this year. Year to date, we had lost $3.7 million in our retail stores.
Okay.
This year, July 1st through the end of this March, our loss is $350,000. So we've already seen an improvement of $3.4 million over the previous year. And that has to do with a lot of the things that we talked about as to why the stores weren't profitable to begin with. And we've made a lot of those changes. We haven't made them all yet, but we've made a significant number of changes that have turned around completely the profitability in the stores. And I think in part, it's based on the investment that we made this year in upgrading some of the stores that have proven to provide an adequate return on that investment. And I think that's why it's important not to look at not doing it again this coming year. This year, we've got landlords who are more than anxious now, given the business climate, to invest more money. So we have the opportunity to get a lot more money from landlords. We have a lot more of an ability to reduce our rents than we would have had in previous years. And since most of what we do or all of what we do is self-funded, I think this is the opportune time for us to be fiduciarily responsible, but for us to pick our spots in enhancing our retail stores, because I think we've proven now beyond any shadow of a doubt that we know how to make money in our retail business, and that by opening up more stores, that'll just add to the transfer, Councilman, as opposed to a reduction in the transfer.
What do you attribute the increase of profitability in the stores?
A lot of it has to do with the overall management of the store, merchandising, promotions. We've started to work on staffing, but we haven't fully implemented our staffing model, which was a $4.5 million reduction over 4 years. And that's because it took time to get our 20-hour part-time position approved. And we're also now working on a 16 to 32-hour position, both of which have been approved by the union. That's going to reduce it by several more $1 million, but it's been a lot better merchandising, promoting, margin improvement, inventory reductions, a whole lot more cash that we've been able to generate from our stores by just much better operating our stores. We've also have already seen some rent reductions in several of the leases that we renegotiated in fiscal year 20. So if you take all of what was not done right in the past and correct what should be the way we do it in the future, this is going to be a very profitable business. And again, I think, a $3.4 million improvement from 1 year to the next is a pretty significant turnaround.
Okay, I'd like to certainly see the data that you referenced that supports that. So if you could send that along, I appreciate that very much. Send it to the full council if you would. I'd be very interested to see that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bob, could you explain how we're doing on the wholesale side, please?
Well, the wholesale side is doing extremely well because what we're doing now, which we weren't doing before up until the last year and a half, 2 years, is we're actually charging our own stores the same markups that we're charging all of the licensees, the exact markup per item per category. So we're generating a whole lot more on the wholesale side in terms of profit than we were doing previously. The issue that you can argue is, well, you were taking that away from the stores, but no, now it won't be the case anymore because we're going to make up that difference in the improvements that we're doing. So now it's all additional income. So our wholesale business has been very good. We have a much better, I think, response in terms of customer service. We're doing some things even during this difficult period of time that is way over and above what normal capacity would be to take care of our customers. But I think we recognize that the way this county is going to look when this thing gets past us is going to be different. And to the extent we can keep as many people in business as we can is going to be to the benefit not only of those businesses, but to ABS in Montgomery County.
It would be helpful to me if you would send some the information of subtracting out the wholesale side that you're charging your own stores so that we can see how the wholesale side is doing for the independent beer and wine stores. Okay? Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Dorfman, thank you. I'll be quick. I just wanted to thank you and the Board of License Commissioners for your nimbleness in accommodating our restaurants and those who had to find new ways to keep their businesses open. The speed at which you did this should be noted. I'm noting it now. We all need to remember that nimbleness and speed are possible when we move forward. And for however long this system has been in place, nearly a century now, change is possible. And so with that, my only question is when will we revert back to the normal business procedure? We've been having lots of conversations in the council about when the new normal will arrive, but with regard to the liberalization of some of your policies, when can we expect a return to normal?
I don't think you're going to see a return to the old normal. I think you're going to see a maintaining of the new normal in many respects. For example, Councilman Glass, I've had a number of requests to be able to allow restaurants to continue on carry-out and delivery, beer, wine, and spirits. And in fact, they're allowed to even do that today without having the COVID-19 problem. It's just a different license. It's a BD license, which allows both on and off-premise sales. So they can continue to do this without a blip. It's just a matter of changing the license that they have. But I think in terms of how we've operationally handled our deliveries out of our warehouse, we've done drop-and-go deliveries, which means that instead of checking in the product with the client or with the licensee at the time of delivery, we've just dropped the product and expected that they would be honest in their assessment as to whether there were any breakage or shortages. And we just allowed them to make the calls if there were, and we gave them credit without being there to do it. That may be something we might want to continue to look at down the road. It makes it more efficient for us in terms of the speed in which we can make deliveries. So I don't think there's going to be this old normal any longer. I think having been myself a restaurant operator and an owner, I can more than empathize with what these people are going through today. And we're going to do whatever we can that makes good business sense, but also makes good business sense for them to try to help them come out of this mess. And it's, coming into it is hard enough. Coming out of this for these people are going to even be more difficult. To rehire all the people they laid off, to retrain the people, to reorder all the product that has gone bad or had to be returned. There's going to be an enormous expense of time and effort in getting these smaller businesses to come back again, and we want to be there to support them.
I appreciate that. And just so I understand it, you said that there's currently a license already on the books that would allow restaurants to deliver alcoholic beverages?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. It's an off-premise. It's an off-premise license, no differently than a small beer and wine store would have. But now it doesn't typically include cocktails or mixed drinks in the way we're doing that today.
That's my point, right? Okay.
Now that's a whole and I think what we want to be sure of there. Now I can tell you from a personal standpoint, which I probably shouldn't be discussing. I had an issue with it because I was more concerned about, and I know this is kind of ridiculous, but people having a cup sitting in their cup holder with a straw in it, drinking on their way home, a nice alcoholic beverage. That concerned me a lot. Now I'm told, well, how long are people really going to be in their car driving home from the restaurant? And are they really going to put a straw in there and drink it? I don't know. But I think if we're going to continue looking at that, we have to look at some of the safety issues, like the way it's sealed, the way a cap is sealed on it, or whether or not it just needs to be in the original vendor's bottles. But I think your point is right. We need to look at how we should be evolving and how successful this has been. If we haven't had problems in delivering products that the restaurants have been delivering, then we ought to look at that and say, then maybe that's the way we should look at it in the future. And I totally agree with you.
Well, and I'm glad I asked my follow-up because it was specifically regarding the delivery of cocktails that I did not know was already allowed, and you've clarified that those types of alcoholic beverages weren't exactly allowed under the licensing. And I absolutely agree with you that we need to have conversations about public health and safety, depending on the direction in which the department goes. But bottom line for me is a liberalization of the department and of the policies and procedures is a good thing. And if it took a century after the creation of this, of the department to help make some progress, we'll take it where we can.
Well, you're prodding along with Councilman Friedson's and Reamer's prodding probably has helped along the way. But I think what we're open to doing is making sure we have the best model that we possibly can, and ensuring that our customers is best taken care of as that will be the case. I can tell you go outside of Montgomery County, we've had conversations with all the major wholesalers. They are picking up product. They are charging bottle fees. They're doing pretty much all of what they were doing before, and we're trying to take a different approach and saying, we want all these businesses back when this thing is over with. We better do what's right for them through this whole process, and that's exactly how we're going to look at it into the future as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I did want to make a note, though. I believe that we have to be very concerned about the open container laws, as to your point, Mr. Dorfman. And obviously, I don't believe you can have that in an open container with alcohol in a vehicle as you're driving it. I think that's so. Obviously, we have to be very careful of that. But I do believe that when things become closer to normal, they won't be normal, but when they become closer to normal, this is not a spigot that gets cut off, because so many businesses will not get back to the place where they were immediately. I mean, hopefully they will eventually, but we certainly know they won't do it immediately. So we're going to all need to your point, we're all going to need to work together to figure out the best solution for everybody to come back as whole as they possibly can. And I have no other speakers. If someone would like to make a motion, please.
So moved.
Council Vice President Hucker and Council Member Rice. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Yeah, I was looking for some of that unanimous. I was double checking my unanimous. Okay, it did carry unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving right along.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is community use of public facilities, and I guess that's Councilmember Rice. Is that correct?
That's right, Mr. President. So we have a pretty straightforward packet. We have 7 items. I will just say that part of the challenge when we had met with CUP before, and this actually spills over into one of our other joint ones that we'll have regarding ball field renovations, is that we've asked for us to get an understanding of the CUP fund balance in terms of actuality. When we met last time, we had an opportunity to talk with staff from OMB, and we haven't gotten that actuality in terms of what the true fund balance is. So that's a little bit of a challenge for us, but I will just say that moving forward, look, there's going to be a very robust conversation around what our schools will look like at 3 o'clock today that should shape not only for the remainder of the school year, but also for the summer. And the expectations regarding childcare for essential employees as well as employees who are going back, what's going to happen with summer camps, all kinds of things. So I would just urge folks, while yes, there is a lot that we need to talk about regarding this, we're going to have to come back to this because I have no idea what the governor's restrictions are going to be. We know that they're important. And so we'll likely have to do some sort of supplemental, some sort of approach to this at a later date. I know that both Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Reamer have been leaders in this effort in terms of our childcare space and really making sure that we're doing what we need to there. But it certainly warrants its own separate discussion outside of this budget format. I think the right approach for us right now is to do a continuity of services budget here and then develop a game plan moving forward of what will work best for us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Yao to walk us through the 7 points of continuity. I like that.
7 points of continuity.
Hi, I'm sorry, my video is not cooperating right now, so
We'll just listen to your lovely voice. Okay.
Okay, so for fiscal year 21, the executive is recommending $11.9 million for the Office of Communities of Public Facilities and 31.27 FTEs. That's a small decrease of $8,549 and a 0.1% decrease from the fiscal year 20 budget. The council staff's continuity of service budget is $11.77 million, or a $83,538 decrease from fiscal year 20, or a 0.7% decrease, and a $74,989 decrease from the CE's recommended 21 budget. The only item not included in continuity of services is the fiscal year 21 compensation adjustment. And for the adjustments related to continuity of services, it includes relocation to Wheaton, active Montgomery transaction fees, security services at Silver Spring Civic Building, MCPS reimbursable custodial costs, personnel adjustments, and just a couple other, the print mail and motor pool adjustments, as well as elimination of one-time expenses or items. The one thing that, again, Council discussed in terms of what they wanted to come back to, and it's actually related to CUP's. It's an item for CIP current revenue appropriation, and that's related to the ball fields issue. Council staff has a memo in your packet that starts on Circle 1 that provides information about CUP's fund balance as requested by the Council. Basically, what they show are scenarios if CUF begins operations by May 25th or by the end of the fiscal year, and what would happen to the fund balance under those scenarios, as well as what would happen if there's an assumption of reduced revenues because of coming back from COVID. Basically, in those scenarios, if CUF is delayed until the end of the fiscal year from opening or past May 25th, or there's a 10% assumption that revenues will go down, the fund balance could not maintain a 10% reserve, which is their targeted reserve, if the ball fields are funded as originally programmed. And as a result, council staff recommends that we hold off right now designating the CUP Enterprise Fund as the source for those revenues until we get a better handle on what it's going to look like when in the economic recovery and once social distancing stops. There's council staff raised another issue to consider, again, because we're not talking in this instance about the fund balance in a continuity of services context, because we're worried about whether their revenues can sustain their operations, because CUP is basically supported by an enterprise fund. It does not receive general fund contributions. The question is whether there other kinds of items that they've been using to spend down the fund balance should continue. And council staff recommends continuing with them because most of them are core to the CUP's operations, but also then watching to make sure that their fund balance can sustain those. And in the case of things like the subsidy programs, if the enterprise fund goes below its reserve, then it may need general funds to support some of those efforts.
Sorry. Well, thank you very much, Vivian. I really appreciate that. And I think from our perspective, Mr. Chair, or Mr. President, what I'd like to do is I'd like to move the 7 pieces that are associated with the packet and the recommended reductions. So the reductions that Ms. Yao mentioned that are in the packet. And then as it relates to the CUP Enterprise Fund and the ball field renovations, I'd actually like to push that into our next discussion because that is a part of the CIP discussion that we will then have jointly with Fed. And so I think it's more appropriate to make that decision in the context of that greater decision point about how we move forward with assuming funds are going to be to help support those CIP projects. So that would be my motion.
It has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been second. Councilmember Jawando got in before 2 fingers got up. So we have speakers, however. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you again for that package. I think Chair Rice's motion is well received. I do support the recommendation. I just wanted to briefly just state my continued interest in how we pretty much rethink the purpose and the use of CUP. It's been a conversation that we've had for a very long time. It was the genesis for my bill that created the subsidy program. But I've said all along that I do want us to consider really in matter of policy, how do we best position our public facilities to align with our stated policy goals? I think that now more than ever, when we start talking about post-COVID-19 specifically, this needs to be front and center. So I would really welcome, conversations perhaps between Ms. Yao and Ms. Ramona Pearson and everybody to almost constitute a team, if you will, to begin to think through this. I want to be respectful of Councilmember Albornoz because I know he has also some comments about that and some ideas. But I honestly think that we need to be completely innovative and totally rethink how we're utilizing our assets. I can only imagine that once, we begin to open up slowly, there's going to be a myriad of needs out there. And folks that want to provide some of that support, but may not be able to afford the fees that we've been charging. And again, I believe that we need to capitalize on our public facilities to address the most pressing needs. I obviously don't know what that's going to look like, but I can only assume that pretty soon we're going to start seeing a picture evolve of what those needs might be. So I just wanted to make that recommendation for our staff to just kind of begin, at least to put forth a framework of how we might discern, what is it that we will need and how can we best position our public facilities. I know childcare has been mentioned, of course, that's critical, but there will be many other issues as well. Thank you for all the work, and I see everybody there with their masks, respecting the distance. So I want to say hello and thank everybody for all their work.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Councilmember Navarro teed it up perfectly. And I want to thank you, Chairman. And I will absolutely support that amendment and proposal because I think you're spot on. So just sidebar, I miss a lot of things about being the Director of Recreation. One thing I don't miss is being in that conference room at 7 o'clock in the morning 4 times a year for the CUP board meetings because I'm not much of a morning person. But let me just state what an important service CUF provides. We have incredible assets in Montgomery County. We so often focus on what's missing, but when you think about our gorgeous libraries, our gorgeous recreation centers, and our schools, many of which have been renovated, these are assets that our community takes advantage of in really remarkable ways. There's a reason why Montgomery County is the healthiest county in the state of Maryland year after year, and a lot of it stems from a lot of the sports programming, after school programming, and other programs that really enhance the overall quality of life of county residents. And it has made sense for some time to have an enterprise structure, which helps fund and help underwrite some of the cost of these facilities. But I think to the Councilmember Navarro's point, the time has come, particularly post-COVID, for us to look at that as a model because we want our residents and citizens to take advantage of those assets. And it doesn't have to be county-run programs. It can be those sister nonprofit organizations, and even the sports leagues as well that are going to be hurting very significantly. And so I really want to commend CUF because I think their management of the Facility Fee Assistance Program, FFAP, is a model for the entire county. And a lot of people work very hard, especially Councilmember Navarro, who proposed that fund in the first place, to really get it to a point where it is now that's very well run and managed. And I think it could be expanded. And so at the appropriate time, I think, I would very much welcome the discussion of increasing that fund to keep CUF and the departments they serve whole while also serving the needs of organizations that are going to be struggling mightily and trying to decide whether or not they're going to stay in business post-COVID. And if we lose them, it's going to impact health and wellness, it's going to impact quality of life, and so many other things. And that's something we can control, is the rent that they pay for these facilities. And conversely, and I say this especially to my colleague, Councilmember Friedson, who's the lead on parks, I think we could enhance FFAP to look at how we're managing our parks as well. And I know Chairperson Anderson happens to be here for another discussion. And so that's another conversation that I think we should have moving forward. And in the best of all worlds, CUF, recreation, and parks are going to be under the same roof in Wheaton. And so there will be even more opportunities for collaboration to holistically address the needs of these organizations, and they will be many. Because as we've heard before, if these sports organizations lose their fall seasons in addition to their spring and their summer, many are going to go down. And that impacts all of us. So we need to do what we can do to help. So I'll put a pin on that. And when we revisit that, I will be very much part of that look forward to being part of that conversation, and will be very supportive of additional funds offered.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate the comments that my colleagues have shared, because I just want to build off of that and say that clearly the Facility Fee Assistance Program is so critically important. I got involved in some of those conversations when the Silver Spring Civic Building opened up and members of the community wanted to occupy and utilize that space, which is now an understatement about community involvement in that space. So many of us are there so often, or at least we used to be when we were able to get together. for events. But my question and concern is that I've been hearing from a number of nonprofit service providers that there is a proposed change to that program, which will be effective July 1st. And so I know Ms. Bell Pearson is, I see her in her mask at the long table, but can you explain to us what the proposed change on July 1st is, or why it's being proposed? And I should have said, my understanding of it is that instead of organizations applying for a waiver, they now have to pay up front, or starting July 1st, they'll be expected to pay up front and then be reimbursed if they're properly assessed. So can you explain what this change is all about?
Well, the change is to make it consistent with other agencies. We mentioned that Parks and Rec were also involved with our same billing system and our software system, ActiveNet. So we were attempting to be consistent. It does not apply across the board, however, to organizations. If they are of a certain size or certain status, they are still entitled to be billed. The more individuals and the large, usually the organizations aren't in that status. But if you'd like more specifics, Ms. Vitale is here, and she has, over our finance division, been sending out the correspondence to explain to people what's involved.
Yeah, I think it is important to explain what the change is, because as you've been hearing, we have been pointing to you as the guiding light and as a best practice, and now for you to say that you're looking at other organizations and other ways of doing things to incorporate their business practices seems to be a little disjointed. And so, but again, underlying the question are concerns that nonprofits are having, and so apparently they're not up to date or at least informed about these parameters.
Okay, we're changing our payment policy so that when you apply, when you request a permit online, you need to make payment at that time, which is the way that Parks and Recreation do it. You apply for a permit online. The way that CUP works now is you apply for a permit online, you don't make payment, your permit's approved a day or two later, and then we have to collect the money from them. And that's caused a collection problem for finance, and it's caused a lot of delinquencies. So what we're changing is the payment policy. You need to pay for your permit at the time you apply for it. The problem with our system for FFAP recipients is that once that switch is flipped, you can't build your permit without making the payment. For organizations that have payment plans, or for organizations whose permits are built in our office by our schedulers, that won't be the case. So as the new permit policy is implemented, we're going to focus on the FFAP program and see, should they be required, if they're building the permits themselves, they'll have to make payment online. A workaround may be, we can build the permit in our office. And then they...
Sure, I mean...
So it's a problem we're aware of. But once that switch is flipped, people who build their own permits online will have to make payment in order to finish that process.
Well, and so I think you can understand that the concern is organizations that are applying for this waiver might not have the money up front, and that's why I'm raising this point.
Yes, that's why we're considering, it may be that they don't build their permits online themselves. If they have a scheduler in our office build the permit, they won't have to make payment at that time. And then their FFAP can be processed.
Okay, well, it sounds like so this policy is still being worked out if there are changes to the possible changes. So please keep us posted, and most importantly, please keep the nonprofit providers posted as they start looking towards next year of programming and their questions that they have regarding this. So
yeah, this policy was supposed to go into effect May 1st, and then when things happened, we pushed it to July 1st. If we need another postponement, we will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Great comments by everyone. And I certainly concur as well on the appreciation for the programs that provide funding for nonprofit access and other community needs access where fees can be an issue. Sorry, I'm getting a little, one second, I'm going to have to close the door.
I'm just happy Councilmember Reamer had pants on.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that insight.
I hit mute, but I didn't turn my computer off. I heard that. All right, that's good stuff. So what I wanted to say was that thank you to Councilmember Rice for just teeing up a subsequent conversation. The page that you referenced as far as circle page 6, I think it is, showing how CUP dollars are expended, I think is important. You know, CUP does generate a lot of revenue from field permitting. And I think a share of that money is rightfully designated today for reinvestment in field expansion to bring more fields into the program to generate more permit revenue into the future. And we've been discussing a way to do that. And again, that's the next item, but it does relate back to this chart here, because that chart kind of lays out a number of the different program areas. And what you see is that in the past, there has been an expenditure for ball fields, but the question now is, are we going to continue that or not? And I certainly do think that we should. But in any event, thank you for all those previous comments, and here we are.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to emphasize that it is, and I may have missed the information. Honestly, I didn't know there was going to be that change that was alluded to regarding upfront payment. But it would be really important if we were notified, before it goes into effect. I really do worry about what will happen to those, groups or organizations. I mean, the genesis for the bill and the creation of the program was because there were many small groups and organizations that perhaps, had some really great services that they wanted to provide, but were not as savvy, did not have the money, all of those things. And so, would not want us to inadvertently work against that goal. So please keep us posted and let us know, because we also interact with many of those groups and organizations, and we're probably going to be asked a lot of questions, and we'll need to be able to answer those. But really want to emphasize that. I understand all of the sort of programmatic issues and how to best utilize efficiencies and all of that, but sometimes that might get in the way of the intent of a particular program that we have put in place to facilitate more access. And of course, it all kind of connects with racial equity and social justice, because this is very much in line with the goals that we're trying to achieve. So again, just don't want an administrative issue to stand in the way of that goal, and please keep us posted before it kind of all goes live so we can be abreast of what's happening. Thank you.
I'm more than happy to send over the information and give you the scenarios, because we do have exceptions that we're very willing to work with, especially nonprofits on, and different ways that we can handle, one of which was described by Ms. Vitale, but there are others too.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded. It was moved by Councilmember Rice, seconded by Councilmember Jawando. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously.
Mr. President, just very quickly, and so to Councilmember Navarro's point, Ms. Yao, if we can just make sure that all of the council is up to date, especially E and C, but all of the council is up to date in terms of what the new changes are, because we have not had a meeting since this has been released, and so no one's been able to see at this point what those new recommendations, rules, processes are. And so from that perspective, it'll be really important for us to have that in advance of any other discussion we have surrounding CUP and the funds that we may end up utilizing.
Will do. I just also wanted to mention that CUF will be undergoing a fee study, a comprehensive fee study that they haven't done for quite some time. And it'll provide an opportunity to look at how it runs now in other creative ways, or how does it meet the needs based on what Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Albornoz were talking about.
Okay, thank you. Moving right along, the next item is FY 21-20 through 26 Capital Improvements Program, Montgomery Parks Ball Field Initiative Project, and I guess Councilmember Reamer will lead that off.
Okay.
That's great. He's batting lead off.
Well,
Batting lead off.
wow.
I thought you were. Councilmember Rice asked me earlier, since we're taking up the grass initiative, to get the lead out and just move it along.
That's very good, yeah. You're at home. You went home. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so here we are. Okay, to summarize this situation, and then I'd like to, before we begin dialogue, go to Councilmember Friedson for any comments he may like to make as lead of our parks, lead for parks. We have been, the council has been intent on continuing to renovate fields. We have about 24 fields that have yet to be renovated so that they can be put into the maintenance program that Parks will pay for in its operating budget. Parks has agreed to step up its expenditures, and we have budgeted for that year after year, and our field program as a result is in much better shape than it ever has been. Of course, it's grass fields we're talking about here, although we rarely ever hear advocacy from the anti-synthetic people when it comes time to putting money for grass, but I digress. We have a goal of renovating 24 more fields, and those fields are largely in older parts of the county, generally East County, places that have not, maybe weren't built out with as much land, as much space. They get more intense use. And so it's time to finish the job that we've started many years ago and fully renovate all of these fields. The challenge is that we had designated some of the CUP fund balance to do that work, and CUP has said that they have, projected revenue issues. So the alternative that we discussed last time was whether to shift that funding source to GO bonds. While that is something that we could do, I'm not sure that our ability to fund it through GO bonds is any better necessarily than through CUP fund balance. And I heard and concur about we're just going to have to keep our eyes on CUP over the course of this coming year. And, it seems likely that we may have to, well, we don't know. It's possible we'll have to step in. And if we do, it's because of a very broad, lack of permitting all kinds of facilities, including fields. But I just personally believe that CUP fund balance should be used partially for fields. Of course, there are other programs that are important that were designated and you saw written up in the previous memo. So with that, just to, say, well, where I think we ought to end up is minimally we ought to designate $300,000 from the CUP fund balance per year for field renovation. And we could stretch out the time that it will take to get through all 24 fields rather than doing it in, I think it's 4 years, doing it in 6 years. That would be a 300,000 year schedule would get us there in 6 years. I don't have any objection to funding it with GO bonds. My concern is that we also have so many other priorities, and I don't know that I feel confident that we'll be able to make that work. It seems to me that there's not really any easy answer here, and we're going to, frankly, I think what we're looking at, no matter what we do, is just sort of trying to get something going and keep our eyes on it. So I feel like the CUP fund balance is a little bit easier for us to handle in that manner than the GO bond issuance, because frankly we may not be able to get it in as GO bonds, and then it's not in. Whereas if we designate it through CUF fund balance, at least we'll know that we'll proceed, and we may have an issue that we have to resolve, which is not just due to ball fields, but it's due to many, many other issues. So having said that, I invite Councilmember Friedson for his comments as Parks lead, and then we could see if staff has additional comments.
I appreciate that. Thank you to the Fed Chair and to the Education and Culture Chair for the continuation of a long-standing conversation that started last budget cycle for this particular iteration of the ball fields, but I recognize was the continuation of an even longer conversation from the prior council that really demonstrated a commitment to this initiative and this issue. And Councilmember Albornoz, who has been involved in this from his previous role as well, and his office and my office worked closely together with all the stakeholders to help come up with a plan that ended up before the joint committee that was endorsed very strongly. And so I just point out that history to point out how we got here, which I think is very important. This is not a new initiative. This was the comprehensive thought process of how to get to the destination that we had all agreed upon last budget cycle. And again, in the joint committee meetings leading up to this point, and this was the funding mechanism that was put in place in order to accomplish the goals within the time frame. I think, and I'll second the chair's motion. I think stretching out the amount of time that it takes, given the fiscal constraints that we're in, is appropriate. But I don't think that, and hope that we don't walk away from the commitment that we have made, and the continued commitment this council has shown to providing ball field renovations and recreational opportunities that go along with them, particularly in the East County, where, as we were told in the joint committee and was noted earlier, much of the renovations would take place, for there aren't as many ball fields to be accessed by members of the community. You know, I think in terms of the CUP funding, one thing that is frustrating, and I hope that we can avoid moving forward, is it is challenging that we don't have in real time the fund balance for the CUP funding. It makes it very difficult for us to make thoughtful, responsible, and forward-looking decisions if we don't know what the numbers are. And while I appreciate projections, that is not, to me, sufficient for us to be able to do our job. And so I just wanted to make sure that I echoed that. You know, I appreciate Councilmember Albornoz's proposal and Councilmember Navarro's comments on that proposal about the need to potentially subsidize, specifically for organized sports. I think no matter what we do, based on the fact that this is a revenue generating enterprise fund, and the revenue has gone to zero, that totally separate from the ball field conversation is a big question of how we address that. And we're going to have to come in with a comprehensive conversation in the summer about how we subsidize some of these recreational opportunities. As Councilmember Glass noted, how we address the nonprofit organizations that are utilizing the buildings and the rentals for that, how we address the major systemic challenges that we face. But number one, we need the data in order to do that. And number two, I think we need to come back and do it comprehensively as part of this conversation. But this would be a thoughtful way to move forward with the commitment, recognizing the moment that we're in, and allow us to continue the work that we have started, and to move forward with what was begun in the previous council, what was continued the last budget cycle, and remain our commitment to the community and to the ball field renovation program in partnership with Parks. So happy to second the motion.
Awesome. And does Great Chair Rice want to? He's co-chair of the joint committee, obviously. So.
Yeah, no, and thank you very much to both you, Mr. Chair, and to lead Friedson. This is very collegial in terms of a way to approach the situation, understanding that we were originally looking at $600,000, but cutting that in half. I think, to utilize the words of a good friend, it makes half people both half happy. And so, from that perspective, I think it's a good compromise, certainly one in which addresses the core issue. We know that we need to continue to do this. We know that open spaces, and this is the thing that I want to remind folks about, because we just had this conversation not so long ago. I don't want to belabor this, Mr. President, but we had just talked a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was like a week and a half ago, about how open spaces have played such a great part in terms of allowing people to social distance and still get out of the house. Those kinds of things are going to be incredibly important still, even in the future. And so from that perspective, having places where folks can go outside of crowded malls and crowded stores and things like that to actually participate in something and have their own individual space to do whatever it is with their own group or family is incredibly important. And so from that perspective, there's a future aspect of this as well that we need to continue to look at. So from that perspective, I fully support it. I think that it's a great compromise and it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I think of the 31 school ball fields listed for renovation, I think the list that we had, 13 are in District 4. So when we keep talking about the East County, I just want to make sure that folks understand that the Mid County has 13 of 34 ones.
Withdrawn. Apologies.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. No, but I appreciate, this is all very fluid, and I understand that. I mean, I get that we're all trying to, act with the information that we have right now, understanding that things are going to change dramatically. The point that Councilman Rice just made is so important. I kept thinking about this, post COVID-19, but even currently, this issue of open spaces are going to play a much more significant role. So it's not just about organized sports, but it's also going to be regarding places where families, et cetera, and children, young people would want to be, and really significant for issues regarding those areas of the county that we know sometimes are disproportionately affected and need to have access to these spaces. So it's interesting. I feel like everything that we would normally, entertain during budget process, in real time, we're all having to readjust in our minds and imagine how different things will be. But we're making the decisions now. So I think this is a good compromise. But I would not be surprised if we perhaps need to revisit some things as we get more and more gain more understanding about this post-COVID-19 world. So I do appreciate the work, and just remember D4.
Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also think this is a good compromise. We need to keep this program moving forward, and the need is great. And people, if you thought there was demand on our fields before, wait till we get to any reason to go outside or any ability to open up. I know people are itching. So to have that in many of these fields are in areas where people are most compact, where there's a lot of multifamily housing, where people haven't been able to be as flexible. So I wanted to try something here and see if this works, and give a shout out to Mike Riley, who showed me this field, which is Oakview Elementary, my elementary school, and that's the state of it right now in one of the fields on the list. And I want to thank him for sending that. I didn't need the motivation, but it underscored for me why this is so important. So I appreciate the motion, and we'll be supporting it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Reamer, did you have anything else or on that?
No, I think that covers it. So we have a motion and a second. Thank you very much.
It's been moved and seconded. It's moved by Councilmember Reamer, seconded by Councilmember Friedson. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Okay. Anything else from either the joint committee chairs?
I never did ask the staff if they missed anything. I presume I didn't. So, standing that, I think we're done.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to move right along, and it's General Services Facilities, and I believe that's Vice President Hucker will be explaining that to us. Maybe not. Is Vice President Hucker here?
Unless he's gotten invisible.
Yeah. Well, he is. We see him, and there's a chair.
5.
Isn't there like a Clint Eastwood, wasn't there a Clint Eastwood
that's
thing
fine.
with the empty chair?
General Service Facilities, is that
That would be a GO item.
GO? I was told that it was.
In my notes, it says GO.
Okay, all right, then you certainly may take it. My understanding that was
I'm here.
Cheney.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Rodriguez Hernandez has prepared a recommendation for us, and I'm just going to turn it right over to her. I see Mr. Dice here as well, and Mr. Mead.
Hi, this is Marlene Michelson. I'm going to just start and introduce it and let you know that that Nicole is one of our junior staff members. In fact, our perhaps most junior staff member on central staff. And so we normally pair a junior staff person with a senior member, a member of the staff to help guide them, perhaps to do most of the talking at a first committee or council work session. But Nicole has done such an incredibly wonderful job that I needed to say nothing more than to introduce her and congratulate her on her good work so far. So I'll turn it over to her.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you so much.
I have to say that she has been before the GO committee and already, has been amazing in some of the budget items. So I consider her to be a veteran already. She's done an incredible job, as Ms. Michelson was just saying. All right, Ms. Rodriguez Hernandez, take it away.
Thank you. So as Councilmember Navarro mentioned, the council will be reviewing and making preliminary decisions on the fiscal year 21 continuity of services budget for general services. We have several DGS and OMB members with us today: Director David Dice, Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer Jamie Cook, Chief Angela Pizzellos, Deputy Director Greg Offland, and OMB Analyst Naeem Mia. So as you will see, there are two funds in the operating budget for general services: the general fund and the printing and mail internal service fund. The executives recommended FY21 general fund budget for general services is 0.4% higher than the approved fiscal year 20 budget at $32.19 million. And for the executive recommended printing and mail internal service fund budget for fiscal year 21, it is 0.2% higher than the approved fiscal year 20 budget at $8.23 million. The executive did not recommend an increase or decrease in full-time employees for the fiscal year 21 budget. The council staff continuity of services budget deducts $304,625 and $72,272 in fiscal year 21 compensation costs for the general fund and printing and mail internal service fund, respectively, as the council will review these items separately for county government as a whole. The council staff's recommendation budget for continuity of services includes fiscal year 20 adjustments such as annualization of compensation increases, personnel costs, and the MLS pay for performance increases and adjustments. In addition, there are cross-departmental adjustments such as motor pool, print and mail, retirement, and OPEB. This budget also shows an increase of lease and maintenance costs of $21,328 for the print and mail internal service fund and their facility. Beyond these adjustments, the continuity of services budget includes $3,120 and $2,500 to adequately fund two legally required services: the Fire Watch service and the fall equipment annual inspection service. And you will see more information on the legal requirements on Circle Page 1. But just to provide some information, the Code of Maryland Regulation, COMAR, requires a fire watch during the period in which an alarm system is inoperable, so that it ensures the building's annual inspection, or ensures the building's occupants are protected and notified to evacuate in case of emergency. In addition, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, requires annual inspections to ensure the equipment is safe to use for projects in work areas that do not have structural protection against falls, such as window cleaning and other construction projects. As a result, the total continuity of services budget as recommended by council staff is $31.89 million for the general fund and $8.16 million for the printing and mail internal service fund, which is less than a 1% reduction for both fiscal year 20 and the fiscal year 21 recommended budget by the executive. In regards to COVID-19, as you know, DGS is centrally coordinating the procurement and distribution efforts for PPE and other equipment for the county, and they have incurred additional FY20 expenses that OMB and DGS are tracking for these purposes. These expenses may continue into fiscal year 21 depending on how our health crisis rolls out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that, I don't know if Mr. Dice has anything else to add?
Well, thank you. I guess given the way the staff just concluded their remarks, I just want to take about 15 or 20 seconds to brag on DGS staff. DGS has really been in the lead in working with the county's back office response to the COVID pandemic. We've worked with local distilleries and wineries to produce hand sanitizer, distributing containers and refills to locations across the county. We've also been at the core of ordering, receiving, storing, and delivering PPE, including masks, gloves, gowns, face shields, and other supplies and materials, not only to first responders, but also county departments, agencies, and our health partners across the county. We've also been working with contractors to ensure that ride-on buses are clean and sanitized every evening, offices are cleaned and disinfected. Earlier, the council heard from ABS. DGS installed barriers at ABS stores and other locations to protect not only county workers, but the using public. And amidst all of this, other work continues. We just nearing the completion of the expansion of the Crabs Branch Men's Shelter. We continue to renovate and maintain libraries, recreation centers, and other buildings, planning for a new cultural center in Wheaton, renovating and replacing child care centers, redeveloping, responding to redevelopment plans, new fire and police stations, and continuing, as we'll see in the next item, to work on the county's environmental and sustainability efforts, including electrifying the fleet. So I just brag on DGS staff for continuing to deliver great service despite the current unique situation that we find ourselves in, and look forward to working on whatever the new normal is going to be. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dice. Thank you for the leadership, and let me join you in bragging about the department. I think they have been very nimble and very responsive, and it shows. Really do appreciate everything that everybody is doing at this difficult time. So with that, I think I'd like to move the staff's recommendation.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Councilmember Reamer. Okay, we do have some speakers. Councilmember Reamer, you are the next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee chair. I just wanted to thank David and his team. You know, we've seen that DGS kind of plays a utility role, and it brings in people with a lot of operational experience. And in a crisis, when you're crisis managing, you need people with those kind of chops. And it's been inspiring to see the performance that the department has brought to our emergency team. And I'm still, you know, amazed when I reached out to Earl Stoddard about the opportunity to find out to procure sanitizer from Twin Valley, the distillery. Jamie Cook responded. You know, David and you and Jamie responded, and Jamie was there that night, and he visited it after midnight. That you know, that is knowing what an emergency crisis situation is all about and how to respond effectively. And of course, Jamie has continued his work day in and day out, you know, extensive shifts, as have many people, but his expertise, just as someone, I've been involved obviously more in those kinds of issues, sanitizers and masks and so forth. And he has been very effective. So one of the MVPs, of our response operation for sure, and compliment to you, David. Yeah, a compliment to you, David, for hiring him and having a department that can attract that kind of talent. The question I wanted to ask about is the bus depot. We might defer that to the next item, which is fleet, but the relocation of the bus depot for Shady Grove. David, you and I had a conversation about the possibility of electrification of the school bus fleet, and whether that might provide a different kind of solution for the depot, because if we don't need a maintenance yard in the same way, if buses are not emitting fumes and making noise because they're electric, they're quiet and they're clean, then maybe it wouldn't be as difficult to locate a depot closer to people. So I just wondered if you'd had a chance yet to develop that idea further. I know pretty much everything hit not long after we had that conversation, after your memorable dance at the whatever that was.
Well, I've learned to dance pretty well, but we did look at that. The economics, given the cost of electric vehicles versus fossil fuel vehicles, makes that a challenge. In principle, Councilmember Reamer, you're correct. They certainly make no noise and no fumes relative to fossil fuel vehicles, but they do cost more. And we have looked at that. I'd be happy to share some of the details of that with you. Obviously, any long-term strategy about electrification of the school bus fleet will have to include the MCPS, because it will have an effect on bus routes and the like. But there's no doubt that locating those buses in generally populated areas won't have the problems that the diesel, even clean diesel vehicles would have. We've also are right now looking at other strategies for relocation of the Shady Grove school bus depot. And although we're still in discussion on property issues that would probably not be suitable for a public forum, I'd be happy to have some private discussions on that subject.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much. And so, yes, Mr. Dice, I completely agree with you that we certainly need to have a conversation with our school system regarding what the future may be. I know that there's been some other conversations, but also, as we talked about before, we're not even sure what our schools are going to look like for the near future. And so from that perspective, there are a lot of different iterations that may come about. So there's still more to come. So just put a pin in that. But one of the things I did want to talk to you about specifically regarding this budget and the great work that you've done, but also the great work that still needs to be done, is regarding cleaning of our facilities. I know that you've ramped up those efforts and that that's happening more frequently than we did before, directly related to COVID-19. So I just wanted to understand a little bit more about how that impact has been in terms of your budget, as well as if we were to go back to starting a phased in approach of opening back some of these facilities that will still require even more cleaning of facilities on an even more frequent schedule. What would that look like in terms of budgeting, and are you prepared for something like that? Have you started to think about that? And will we, in fact, most likely need to consider some sort of supplemental funding to help make sure something like that happens?
Well, thanks. We have, in fact, looked at that. Let me first talk about how the new custodial services contract is structured. It is a performance-based contract as opposed to a line item or per square foot contract. And so the custodial services contractors have to perform their work to a certain standard, which has already, even before the COVID pandemic event came about, was already resulting in vastly improved services, as noted, primarily by many of our public engaged customers, such as libraries and recreation. We did increase, before the stay-at-home order came about, we did increase the level of cleaning to twice-a-day wipe downs, everything basically from a 6-foot level down, walls, corners, cabinets, counters, and the like were wiped down twice a day. And we would anticipate continuing that. Obviously, the increased presence of hand sanitizer, both for back in the office areas as well as public stands, which we already rented and are now purchasing, because we do think that certainly that heightened awareness is going to be part of that overused phrase, but the new normal. We're all much more conscious about our social interaction, and that will be integrated into the workplace. Clearly, the twice-a-day cleanings, and again, these are not comprehensive custodial cleanings, but really wipe downs with disinfectant wipes, have an increased cost. It is a marginal cost, but we are tracking that. I don't have the numbers in front of me as to what the increased cost would be, and we can certainly provide that. But we anticipate that that would be certainly a standard practice, particularly in those areas where we have transactional business with the public, our health centers, our taxation centers, our permitting areas, and others where there's a lot of counter and public interaction. There'll be cleaning. We had started to do that before the stay-at-home executive order came about, and we're ready to continue to pick that up. Many of our facilities, though not highly occupied, still are occupied, and so some level of custodial services are still performed. And once a reoccupation of the workforce is resumed, whatever that may look like, and the executive has instituted some planning in that regard, we're prepared to reopen facilities in response to that plan. I hope
Thank you
that
very
answers
much,
the question.
Director
We can get you
Dyke.
some
Thank
more of
you
the
very
financial
much.
details.
Oh yeah, no. That was actually perfect. Thank you very much to the government operations, fiscal policy leader as well. Apparently, the great strategic work that you did with Director Dice to begin with put us in a much better position when it came to dealing with this pandemic, which is great. So thank you for your great work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be quick because I know we've got a closed session to get to. Director Dice, I was going to say David because he's a friend. Thank you for your leadership and that of your team. I know your team intimately, and they are fantastic, and I know how hard they've worked through all of this. We're going to have some tough budgets ahead with likely savings plans at some point, and I always try to put this plug in when we're talking about DGS. It is tempting to take some of the preemptive work that they do as a savings, but just as my colleagues all know, that is penny wise and pound foolish, because we ultimately end up having to spend a lot more on the back end to fix items and that are not repaired properly in the first place. So I will be prepared to make those tough decisions, as I know all of my colleagues will moving forward as well, so that DGS can continue their important work to take care of these assets that are so important. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I'll be brief as well. A lot of the comments I was going to make have been made. I wanted to echo the gratitude to you, Mr. Dice, and your department, our landlord, our realtor, our building engineer, our operations manager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But particularly in this crisis, which has been a real challenge to figure out how we adopt and adapt to the new realities that we face as a government. Your team has really stepped up in all hours of the night, as we heard earlier from Councilmember Reamer, and I know all of us are very grateful for that, for their dedication to their work, and really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just did want to underline the words bus depot to you, Mr. Dice. I know you've heard from us before on that topic, as you have with many other council members. So it is certainly something that we continue, and I know you continue to look for solutions. Thank you.
Working
And it's
hard
been
on it.
moved. I appreciate that. It's been moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Councilmember Reamer. All those in favor, please raise your hand, and that is unanimous. And the last item we have before we go to closed session is General Services, Fleet Management, and NDA Motor Pool Fund. Is that Vice President Hucker? Is he supposed to be doing this one?
In my notes, it says it's Geo, but I believe it's.
Then it's GO. Okay. I had some misinformation. Not the first time I've given out any.
I have to ask too because, maybe things have changed. I have no idea.
Well, and the fact that we didn't go to committee, you can't tell from the packets in some cases. So anyhow, please, Councilmember Navarro, please handle our fleet.
Yes, Ms. Broderick has prepared a packet for us. In this particular instance, there is a little bit of a change regarding how we've been operating with the continuity of service. I want to point out that she has highlighted that there are a number of items that are necessary to maintain continuity of services that were not included that were not necessarily there in FY20, but some of those are related to the new bus, rapid transit, flash, and flex buses, and they reflect the purchase of new electric buses. So I'm going to just turn it over to her to explain to us how this all works, and then we will open it up for discussion. Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to clarify a little bit of the confusion, Fleet used to go to T&E, and then I believe this was the first year it was supposed to go to GO. But as far as the budget this year, for the FY21 executive recommendation, the budget was approximately $90 million, and that's an increase from FY20 of almost $5 million, or else a 5.9% increase. Council staff's recommending a reduction from this year's recommended budget of about $1.8 million, which is a 2% reduction and reflects not approving 2 new FTEs, which I'll get to in a couple of minutes. I've got a chart on the first page listing following items which are not included in continuity of services. The first item is funding additional vehicle replacements for about $713,000. Fleet Management Services budgets approximately $10 million a year to replace vehicles in the county fleet. They have a formula based on age, mileage, and repair costs for each vehicle, and the recommended budget includes an additional $713,000 this year for that. And while it is necessary to continue to replace vehicles as needed, this is an additional $713,000, and I'm recommending not including that this year. And the next item is enhancing a subsidized incremental acquisition cost for electric vehicles for $300,000. Generally, in the past, any department who wanted to purchase an electric vehicle paid the additional amount, the cost above a regular fossil fuel vehicle. This is providing a one-time funding of $300,000 that will be paid within the Motor Pool Fund in order to help encourage departments to transition over to electric vehicles instead. One that has gotten interest recently from several council members is the apprentice training program for $202,000, and this is where the 2 new FTEs come in. This would be an apprentice program that's partnering with MCPS, their automotive program, to bring in approximately 3 to 5 new students each year to DFMS, I believe, as apprentices in their mechanics automotive technician trade, for a starting salary of $37,000, and I believe Deputy Director Jamie Cook is on line too if he wants to provide any additional details. Unfortunately, at this time, since it is a new added service, I'm recommending reduction. And the last one recommended for reduction is the compensation adjustment for $550,000. As far as continuity of services goes, there are some multiple additional enhancements or added services that go beyond the approved FY20 budget. However, they're mostly related to the new rapid rapid transit flash buses and flex buses, and they reflect the purchases that have already occurred of 4 electric articulated buses and 8 new flex buses. One item is replacing the hybrid battery engines or transmissions to ensure reliable transit services for $3.5 million. That is the largest enhancement, but it's for major repairs to keep existing buses in service. The next item is additional tools and safety equipment to support transit and heavy fleet maintenance for $450,000. And while that does include new equipment, if vehicle replacements are reduced, repairs are likely to increase as well. And additionally, this funding includes fall arrest safety equipment for the mechanics who are working on large buses. It's necessary to add a parts inventory for the new buses for approximately $330,000. There is a contract increase for bus service lanes to accommodate the new Flash and Flex buses for $146,000. Battery monitoring equipment for the new electric buses is $100,000, and that requirement is required under the terms of the vehicle warranties. And another electric charging station equipment and services for $65,000 is required for new vehicles as well. I wanted to point out that there could be additional savings in the fleet budget this year from the continued decrease in fuel prices, and they may have ongoing charges related to purchasing protective personal equipment as well as cleaning costs for vehicles and their facilities. The Motor Pool Fund Contribution NDA is part of this review today, and that is an NDA fund that provides for the acquisition of new additional fleet vehicles as opposed to the replacement vehicles. And there are a few items that I'd like to discuss here. Ones that I'm not recommending for inclusion because they do not provide for continuity of service would be the Fire and Rescue Investigator Vehicle. When the council reviewed the fire department budget last week or so, they did not recommend adding the new investigator position, so this vehicle is no longer required. And in addition, the new 4 police officer positions were not recommended for approval this year either, and so those 4 new police vehicles will not be required this year either, and that's a savings of $152,000 out of that NDA. There are a couple of vehicles that I do think are necessary for continuity of services, including the sheriff prisoner van for $45,000. They don't have a van that's ADA compliant, and this is provided for loading and transport of individual inmates who use wheelchairs. The sheriffs provide the medical transport to the hospitals for inmates from the jail as needed. And while there is a county vehicle available that can accommodate wheelchairs, the sheriff still must reserve it first, and it doesn't provide for public safety protections needed to maintain safety for the deputy sheriffs who are actually doing the loading of the inmates in the van with their wheelchairs. There's also 2 police vehicles that provide patrol vehicles for the 2 new police officers that were hired already in FY20, and that is a collectively bargained benefit. We're recommending approval of those items as submitted.
Thank you, Ms. Farad. I want to make sure that we remind ourselves, one of the reasons why we decided not to do FY20 level budget consideration was because there were some particular instances, like this one, where obviously these particular items are part of the continuity of operations because we need to continue our work, obviously, with the rapid transit flash, initiative, as well as the flex buses. And as it was just mentioned, some of these ADA compliant vehicles, this is something that we actually need to do our continuity of operations. So I wanted to, highlight that because it is a little bit different than some of the other instances where we have had to reject something that was not in FY20. This definitely falls under the, I think, category of continuity of operations. With that, I don't know, Mr. Dice, anything you'd like to add before I turn it over to Council President?
No, not in particular. We went into this understanding that we would probably be looking at FY20 as our operating norm, and we're prepared to do that. The only real issue, of course, is, and this is the difficult choices that council has to make. We do have ongoing pressures to comply with legally mandated reductions in our greenhouse gas emissions, and that's why we are focusing on electric vehicles. New vehicles, administrative, non-public safety vehicles that are purchased are going to be electric vehicles. The county executive has made that clear, and that is our commitment. So whenever we are replacing vehicles, it is with an electric vehicle. And I understand council members have had questions about the apprenticeship program. This is Jamie Cook, who used to be our fleet manager and has already been recognized, my very capable chief operating officer. The apprenticeship program was his brainchild, and if there are council questions about that, I would invite him to answer those in response. I think it's a dynamic program, and we hope that the council will fund it.
I appreciate you mentioning that. I was going to say that, we also are going through this budget process with keeping in mind that there will be particular items that we would like to revisit. Obviously, what we're trying to do is just respond to the emergency and being cautious because we don't know what the fiscal situation will be. This is one particular program that I personally would very much like for us to revisit. I think it is just very much in line with everything we have been discussing about workforce development and opportunities. It also helps us because it helps us basically grow our own. So I definitely want to make sure that our staff, at least from my perspective, and if my colleagues agree, that we can put that on the list, one of those items that we would like to look at in post sort of crises, because at the end I think we will save money when we're able to build our own pipeline. That is also a very much an important component. But with that, I would like to move the staff recommendation and then turn it over to the Council President for any other comments or questions from my colleagues.
Thank you very much. It's been moved by Councilmember Navarro. Is there a second? It is seconded by Councilmember Rice, and because of that, he's the next speaker.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, Director Dice and Chair Navarro again for great information. Let me just say that the apprenticeship program is certainly one that, of course, its partnership with Montgomery County Public Schools, I think will be a key and integral part of us getting people back to work. So certainly from that perspective, along with just the value of the program itself, is certainly a priority. Again, with the schools being in the situation they are, there is no urgency of right now. It is certainly something that we can come back to. And so from that perspective, I feel comfortable. While I completely support this program, think that we can revisit this in a few months once we know what is going to be the iteration of schools for the fall. So from that perspective, I'm okay with it for right now, but I do definitely want to put a very big pin in that on the wall and say that it's something that we definitely need to continue to follow and make sure that we're not losing opportunities to connect many of our children with work. So thank you.
Thank you. I have no other speakers. It's been moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Thank you. The next item that we have is I'm going to need a motion for a closed session to conduct the collective bargaining negotiations or consider matters that relate to the negotiations pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article 3-305 subsection D9. This meeting would be to consider matters that relate to the negotiations. The topic is collective bargaining negotiations with county employee unions. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It was moved by Councilmember Reamer, and is there a second? Seconded by Vice President Hucker. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that carries unanimously. We are adjourned this meeting and will go to closed session.